This week on the Writers Detective Bureau, dealing with criticism, assisting outside agencies, and a twin as a murder suspect. I'm Adam Richardson, and this is the Writers Detective Bureau. Welcome to episode number 9 of the Writers Detective Bureau, the podcast dedicated to helping authors and screenwriters write professional quality, crime-related fiction. I started helping writers back in 2015, and that was when I was introduced to the concept of having a platform, aka a mailing list of fans that I could email. Back then, I did what everyone else fumbling through this process did. I joined a mailing list service that offered a free option. Eventually, I got to a point where my list had a few hundred people on it, and I was getting frustrated with the mailing list service that I was using at the time. That was when I discovered ConvertKit. It was designed for creatives, writers, bloggers, artists, podcasters. But to be honest, deciding to pay for a mailing list service rather than using the clunky free one of a different company was really a big decision. It seemed daunting, but I made the leap. I imagine if you haven't made this leap yet, you're probably feeling the same way about transitioning to a service like ConvertKit that is designed precisely for creatives, like fiction writers, that want to build buzz for their self-published books. Well, ConvertKit has now made making that leap a lot less scary. ConvertKit has introduced Creator Pass. Creator Pass is 4 courses: Build, Launch, Grow, and Thrive. Plus, it includes a full year of ConvertKit mailing list service and an awesome online community of coaching and support. I can't say enough how awesome and supportive ConvertKit is as a company. So anyway, if you want to join the ConvertKit family and make the leap a lot less daunting, you can't beat Creator Pass. To learn more about the Build, Launch, Grow, and Thrive courses, plus the full year of ConvertKit service and the online support community, visit writersdetectivebureau.com/creatorpass. If you're driving right now, the link will be in the show notes. Each week, I mention that listeners help me with covering the cost of this podcast by supporting me for as little as $2 per month through Patreon. In addition to my first supporters, Joan Raymond and Guy Alton, I have to thank authors Natasha Bajema, Natalie Borelli, Joe Trent, Siobhan Pope, and Leah Cutter for their support of this podcast. As of this month, these Patreon patrons are actually covering the monthly podcast hosting fees I incur. So thank you very much for that. Many of them have author websites, which you can find in the show notes by going to writersdetective.com/9. You're probably listening to this podcast because you too are a creator. Give your tribe of fans the chance to support you and your creations by using Patreon. Learn how to set up your own Patreon page by visiting writersdetective.com/Patreon. Patreon. Let's talk about dealing with criticism. Whether it's a 1-star review from some troll on Amazon, or a citizen getting in your face about how you handled a 911 call. Either way, criticism sucks, but it's a part of public life. Most of the time, they're wrong. They don't know you. They don't know the writer behind the work or the person behind the badge. One very important lesson I learned from my FTO, that's Field Training Officer, when I was a rookie, is that the public's not talking to you. They're talking to the badge that's pinned on your chest. Now, they might read my name tag, but they don't know me. They aren't judging me. They don't know anything about me. The same is true for you and your writing. Their criticism isn't directed at you personally. They don't know you. They don't know all of the thought, effort, blood, sweat, and tears that go into your writing. Appreciating someone's writing is entirely subjective. My favorite quote on this topic is from Dita Von Teese. She said, "You can be the ripest, juiciest peach in the world, and there's still going to be somebody who hates peaches." Now, I know that's a bit of a woo-woo answer. I have no doubt there's a tiny part of you thinking, but what if they're right? What if I really do suck at writing? What if this story does have plot holes? Well, another important lesson I learned from that FTO was don't make excuses, own your mistakes. So if you really do agree with the criticism, or at least your subconscious thinks that there's a thread of truth to it, own it. Don't blame your editor or you having to meet an impossible deadline, own it and treat it as an important lesson to learn from and move forward. Keep going. To be a writer, you have to write. Write, as in the infinitive verb with emphasis on infinitive. You keep going. That's what being a writer means. It's not about having an agent or having a publisher. It's whether you show up or not. I put on a badge and a gun every day, even on my quote-unquote days off. That makes me a cop. Just like writing every day makes you a writer. There are only a handful of careers that we use to define a person. He is a writer. She is a cop. Nobody is a vice president of the banking division of blah, 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 blah. That's not who they are. But you are a writer or you are a cop. So there are similarities there. And let me tell you, nothing kills the easy mingling at a cocktail party like getting outed as either a cop or a writer. It turns into 20 questions and then having to politely listen to the opinions of the uninformed. Does this sound familiar? Where after they hear that you're a cop or a writer, that the response is usually something like, oh, pause while they think of a question, and then you get hit with the frequently asked questions of the top 10 assumptions. If you're a cop, it's usually a question about this one time when a cop pulled me over, blah, blah, blah. And as a side note, this is why cops almost always have a good lie for an alternate career. I usually say I'm a human cannonball. No, seriously, when pressed, I have an entire anecdote about a career-ending injury due to a miscalibration of the cannon. Hey, did you know those cannons are actually pneumatic? Then it turns into carny jokes, and the entire conversation has been steered away from anything to imply that I might be a cop. But when you are a writer, those next questions can seem like daggers attacking your credibility and career success. Oh, so you're a writer? Do you have an agent? Who's your publisher? Would I have read any of your work? Those assumptions by non-writers are what lead writers to feel that imposter syndrome. Or worse, you want to duck the question rather than claim your title as writer with a capital W. But what if we were at that same dinner party and the conversation turned to fitness and I asked you, are you a runner? How would you answer? More importantly, what did you envision when trying to qualify whether you are or are not a runner? Regardless of whether you are or aren't, I'm betting the mental image you had was something like getting up in the morning and putting on your running shoes, or maybe setting the chronograph on your watch or figuring out how to work that Fitbit thing, and then setting out to jog or walk or run or sweat or nearly die out of overexertion out in the neighborhood somewhere. But if you answered, yes, I am a runner, how often do you run in order to call yourself a runner? Daily? 3 times a week? Once or twice a month? Or do you only run when chased? How often do you have to run to still call yourself a runner righteously? But what if the very next question after I asked, are you a runner, was something like, so who are your sponsors? What's your best marathon time? Have you competed in the Olympics? If someone asks if you're a runner, and the next question is to size you up against Usain Bolt's career, it sounds absurd. If someone asks if you're a writer, and the next question is to size you up against Stephen King's career, it's still absurd. So don't let that comparison define how you view your own writing career. Just keep writing. Chris Moody is back with a several-part question. You can find Chris at chrisamoody.com. Chris writes, I have a couple of questions this time. Let's say someone you went to the police academy with wound up working for one of the small police stations in the forests of Northern California. Years later, you just happen to be visiting there for vacation when his department is trying to investigate a crime where, while they may have the book knowledge on how to do it, they don't have the practical know-how of actually doing it. Would it be difficult for them to ask you as a person on vacation for assistance with the investigation before calling in the state police or FBI? If they did ask for your help, would they pay you directly, or would your home department bill them? Assuming I'm not from the forests of Northern California, it would be a reach to think that the local agency would ask for your help personally. For a variety of reasons, it would be one thing if you happen to be an FBI profiler that happens to be on vacation there, but if you're a detective from an agency elsewhere, especially outside of the state, that would be very unlikely. On a friendly level, you might be able to have a conversation with your friend and try to help, but it would not be an official, professional, on-the-clock experience. California, our state police is actually the Highway Patrol. Many years ago, they absorbed the California State Police, which were actually primarily responsible for protecting state buildings, like our Department of Motor Vehicles or the state capitol or the governor of the state of California. So unlike other states, we don't have a huge state police influence when it comes to detective work. We do have the California Department of Justice crime labs, but not necessarily an investigating body. Not like Texas, where you have the Texas Rangers, or Tennessee with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. So for a small police station in Northern California that needs help, their first go-to would likely be the county sheriff. And it's possible that the sheriff's department would actually take over the entire investigation, especially if it's a very small police station. California is interesting. We call the Bay Area Northern California, where in reality, the Bay Area, geographically speaking, is actually about midway. But when you start getting up near the Oregon border, like Modoc County, you really are talking about small towns. Using Modoc as an example, in the very upper northeastern corner of the state, right off of the Modoc Sheriff website, it says that there are approximately 13 deputies assigned to the patrol unit, patrolling 4,200 square miles of land, including approximately 13 townships. And the entire county has a population of about 9,500 people. So in looking at headlines from 2016 when a Modoc County deputy was shot and killed by a suspect, while looking at the press release, it shows that the Shasta, Siskiyou, Lassen, and Butte County Sheriff's Departments all assisted along with the California Highway Patrol in investigating the shooting. So finding examples of real crimes and looking at the press releases to see who is involved, or in the ensuing court cases that will reveal which detectives testified, can give you a good idea of what agencies will actually get involved in the case. I know that the California Highway Patrol responded to the initial shots fired call in this case, so I don't know that they actually provided any kind of investigative help other than being thanked in the press release as part of their initial response. So while it certainly looks like an all-hands-on-deck scenario for that area, it would very likely be police officers, deputy sheriffs, detectives from that general area, even if it's a neighboring county, to provide the expertise and get that done. And like I said, being on vacation, it's very, very unlikely that that would happen. If in the very remote chance that that protagonist of yours did end up helping, he would still get paid by his home department like normal. And whether there was any kind of cost recovery, that would have to do with the department that he works for getting money back from that Northern California department. In law enforcement, that rarely happens. For the most part, we just simply pay for ourselves, and whatever cases we get involved in, we get involved in. Chris's second question is, let's say you're investigating a murder, and it comes down to one of a set of twins perform the deed. However, you can't get either to turn on the other. How much effort do you put in trying to identify which twin did it? Well, you put all of your effort into it. You need to identify the individual suspect, or prove that the two of them conspired to commit the crime together. If you're a fan of any kind of forensic files or learning about forensic science, you certainly are aware that identical twins share DNA, but their fingerprints will differ. There may be some pretty good similarities to them, but each twin will have a unique set of fingerprints. But assuming that there's some sort of eyewitness or DNA that's pointing to these two twins in particular, where we have the case narrowed down to one or the other out of any other human being on the planet, that's a really good start. So if this was my case, I'd get a wiretap going on both twins' phones and then interview them separately in the hopes that that interview, or after leaving that interview, it prompts a phone call between the two of them and some sort of finger pointing or discussion as to what happened. And then the same thing goes for anyone close to them that might be part of either one or both of their alibis, like a partner or spouse that doesn't want their twin to go down for murder. So I would only be up on a wiretap on the two possible identical twins because I'd be able to have probable cause and show that there's no other way for me to get this information. And so I wouldn't have the ability to get a wiretap for their spouses necessarily, but I'd be able to hear those conversations by having a wiretap up on the twins' phones. And Chris's last question is, if during your investigation you found the person murdered severely abused the twins during their childhood, would this lessen how vigorously you attempt to find out which one performed the murder? The short answer is no. If you've read any of Michael Connelly's Bosch books, you probably remember the saying, everybody counts or nobody counts. This is absolutely true. You work the murder case regardless of where it leads or why. It's up to the jury to decide the suspect's fate and take that childhood trauma into account. That's not the detective's job. In the 1986 Michael Mann film Manhunter, which is the original film adaptation of Thomas Harris's book Red Dragon, which is the book before Silence of the Lambs, the protagonist, Will Graham, learns about the childhood trauma of this murder suspect. And he has a really great quote. He says, "My heart bleeds for him as a child. Someone took a kid and manufactured a monster. As an adult, someone should blow the sick fuck out of his socks." I think every homicide detective has worked a case that this quote would apply to. Thanks again for the questions, Chris. I truly appreciate it. You can find Chris at chrisamoody.com, and a link will be in the show notes at writersdetective.com/9. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Writers Detective Bureau podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe. If you belong to a writers group, in person or online, I would love it if you'd share this podcast. This podcast is created for you. So don't be shy and submit your crime fiction questions, or just say hello at writersdetective.com/podcast. Thanks again for listening. Write well.